right, and we're live. Hello, if you're just tuning in for the first time, I am James Kraken, independently published author. I style myself as the cyberpunk guy, but I write a bunch of stuff. And today, I'm here to talk about post-apocalyptic world building for the purpose of fiction, right? And I was thinking about it because I'm sitting here writing a post-apocalyptic book for release later this year. And I was like, I should bring someone on to talk about this because they might know something that I don't about how these things would actually play out. How about rhsnow? Because
so sweet.
I reviewed her book, the first installment of her series, a while ago, back when I was still doing reviews. I've kind of stopped doing reviews. I had some criticism. I had some praise. I liked the book. rhsnow's obviously come on the channel before if you're a longtime viewer, and if you're not, you should be, and you should hit the subscribe button.
Yes.
So,
Hi.
First of all, would you like to pitch yourself before I get into the subject?
I suppose so. Hi, I'm rhsnow, otherwise known as James. I love you, and I'm your beta reader. Pew pew. And it's true.
This is not a nepotism stream.
Full disclosure. No, he actually gave me what he considered to be his honest review. He knew I was his beta reader. He still gave me an honest review of what he thought about it. And it's out there. That's the thing, is that we try to get honest reviews for our books. And that's actually a really big deal right now. So that's one of the reasons why I appreciated him doing that, because even though he knew me and he was like, hey, I'm going to do this. I was like, please don't hurt me. And he told me exactly what he thought, which is important. We need to be able to be honest with each other. And I've gotten great reviews from other people. So it's not against James. He's just telling me what he likes and doesn't like. So I was really excited when he brought me on here because I'm kind of a fangirl of his. And so I wanted to go ahead and come on because I think that it's important for us to talk as indie authors about what we're doing and how we're doing it. This is such an important moment in publishing history. We are coming into an era where the great publishing houses are falling. The curtain is coming down and the man behind the curtain is being revealed. And we're seeing all the machinations behind these great industries. And we're saying to ourselves that we can do it. We actually can. And of course, it's a huge risk to do this. So I have written actually right now it's up to a 9-part series. It's all contiguous. Yeah. Yes, we're up at 9.
Got more than me.
It is a long-running series. I wanted something that was a Game of Thrones level series. When a chained man at a gate meets a spectral child, he leads her to a mysterious woman and a hidden city. And at that hidden city, we will discover a fight for freedom. And that is, of course, the crux of the first part of Watcher of the Damned. And it is a slow reveal and a slow burn reveal at that. I have several readers who have read the entire series from start to finish as we have been here. And they have been absolutely, of course, you have to love a series to read that far. And I say that guardedly because I have read some series where I was literally just praying that our author would pull it out. Most famously, Elric of Melbourne, because I was just like, no, right at the end, I'm like, why did I do this to my life? But still a great series. Read all 17 books of Conan the Barbarian in all of its various forms with the lovely Frazetta covers, of course, because I love them. And so I'm a long-running series fan. So this is a really slow reveal in my world. And so it kind of goes both ways. People are expecting to pick it up and it's like, hey, it really hits it right there and it tells all the secrets. It can be a difficult read because they're wanting to know more. And it's like, oh, I didn't get it in the first book. So I decided this would actually be a spoiler, reveal here. So if somebody actually tunes in tonight, they're going to see me talk about things that I will not talk anywhere else because I'm always very jealous about my spoilers. And I won't reveal the ending spoiler, but I will talk about some of them and what's going on in the book, because it's really hard to talk about world building without talking about spoilers.
Yeah,
because
I'm glad you're going to be talking spoilers because I will also be talking spoilers about my stuff. I'm going to call it quasi spoilers because until it's in a book that somebody has purchased from me, it doesn't really count.
Well, no. It's really hard because you actually had questions when you were saying, why did this thing makes me uncomfortable and that thing was going on. I was like, oh man, I really want to tell spoilers, but I wasn't on I didn't have a way to do it. So we're fixing to probably go over some of them. But yeah, when you're doing spoilers, it's hard because you run the risk of saying, okay, I've revealed everything about the series. Why would they even bother reading it? At the same time, because I've got readers that have read all the way through, I'm thinking, okay, they already know that. Maybe a few little tidbits won't really hurt. And so I think this is going to be kind of fun. So I'm actually going to put that on you're going to see me here in a minute. I'm going to put it on my post that I made that I'm going to have a spoiler session. I guess we'll call it, is it called spoiler session? Where you just like go in. Yeah, let's do it.
I'm not going to update the title. I kind of like branding myself as Craft Talk because it lets me run my mouth about things.
Oh, no, I love it. I think that's a great way of calling it. I like that. I'm just going to put it right there in my little thing there. Hi, guys. I'm doing a spoiler session.
So John A. Douglas in the chat needs to know, if you're going to be spoilering things, should he go? Is he one of your long-term readers?
Yes, he is a long-term reader. John, you can stay. I'm not going to give any huge spoilers. I'm going to give a few world-building spoilers. I don't know how to say this the right way. I just realized, oh, wow, now I've got a reader in the chat. I'm like, I'll be careful with them. Let me put it that way. We'll do a spoiler session and we'll make sure. And I will say this is a spoiler, and you can mute your little button for a minute if you're really afraid.
Yeah, I need the watch minutes. I'm trying to get monetized, guys.
Yeah, I know. So yes,
in fact, pull me up in a second screen. Get dual casting going. Watch me on your phone too. But hello, KGB Books.
Hello, KGB.
Interesting name. Hello, Timo. And I wanted to jump in because you gave me a great tangent point, but I'm just gonna pull it back up. Everyone in the chat is invited to my now Discord server. I'm moving off of Gilded because the Roblox thing. But my book club, which is a monthly book club, is available through the Discord server linked in the description. A couple months ago, we read Elric and Melnibone. And mixed feelings. We only read the beginning because they're releasing these omnibuses in like the chronological order of Elric. And well, I can't assign like 15 short books for 1 month of reading, so I just kind of chose it as a sample a few months ago. This Saturday, hopefully, holidays when I screw things up, we're going to be talking about book 1 of the John Carter series by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and anyone that reads Princess of Mars is invited on. I try and get a large panel of guests. You could be one of them, chat.
That's right.
Yeah, I broke form for July, though, which I need to announce because today is July 1st. So July's book is actually going to be nonfiction because I decided what I want to read, because I'm the tyrant here, is The Longest Day.
Wait, is that Normandy?
Yes, it is.
Sweet.
I read a lot of nonfiction, and that's one of the reasons I'm no longer really doing book reviews. It's like, how can I review The Longest Day, right?
The Longest Day is so iconic that, first of all, I actually read it. It's been a long time. I had a whole series that I read, Jeremiah Denton to Hell and Back, and Longest Day, and several. My father was a World War II veteran, and so he actually had several of these books that he read as a way of dealing with PTSD. He would go back and he would read the battles and stuff, Battle of Leyte Gulf, and others that he had been involved in. So he had them in his library, and I still have that library. I've got about 1,500 books in there. That's just nice. I can't show them. There's so many, and most of them are over the age of 50. Actually, I have a lot of older books because I'm a really huge fan of antique books that have been used and loved and everything else, especially old Bibles. They're like my John. I love them. And so these books that are written that have become iconic, you don't really want to go in and criticize and say, oh, I hate it. I mean, I can say I don't like this part. I will say openly, for me, for instance, with Elric of Melnibone, because it hurts me, because I need something to believe in. You can live long enough into your life, you get to a point where you really would like to have some hope. It's eternal darkness forever, and then we all just die is a really tough way to live, and I've known people that lived like that. So sometimes I pick up a book and I'm like, I just really need to be uplifted. And so, of course, I try to do that in my writing as well, but it doesn't change the fact that the Elric series is a great series and it's so iconic. So when I say what I think about a book, it's different than there's really not a criticism for it. This author obviously is great. They've done well. Me going in and say, well, I don't think he should have done that. He made millions of dollars and he was perfectly satisfied. Me coming in and going, I don't think he should have done this thing, it probably wouldn't work very well, because I don't write that way. I don't. And I know that I've got things that I could certainly improve on. All of us do. But I think when we go into critique older books, especially ones that have such a huge fan base, rather than critique, it's just review. Say what we love or we don't love, what we felt, the experience of reading that series and what it meant to us and what it changed us is more of a testament than a critique. If it strikes me in a way that's just so brutal that I think about it for days and can't stop thinking about it. In the case of Berserk or Blood Meridian, those are books that when you read them, they stay with you. And me critiquing them, like I said, it's better for me just to explain my experience. I think that's sort of interesting. An angle for you to take it from.
First, but the discussions aren't styled as critiques. Sometimes we like the book, sometimes we don't. Some people, like when we did Catch 22, we mostly just talked about which jokes we found funny and who couldn't stand through the misery at times.
Yeah.
But you brought up Blood Meridian, which is a fantastic book.
I'm having to psych myself up for Blood Meridian. I read All the Pretty Horses by James McCormick, and
have you read The Road?
Cormac McCarthy, there's James McCormick's a different dude, and I loved it, but I really had a hard time with the spoiler. Prison rape scenes are not my jam. I am really uncomfortable with them, and it was hard for me to read. At the same time, the language and the imagery was so profound, it actually affects Watcher of the Damned. And actually, Cormac McCarthy, he goes back to almost to Zane Grey, the way he describes things. He is very evocative in his language. The prose is so beautiful. You could read almost anything he says and it becomes something of beauty. So everybody tells me, you really need to go read Blood Meridian. There's a lot of parallels. And I was like, I'm going to have to bolster my self-esteem. I'm going to have to eat ice cream right beforehand and then afterwards go cry in a pillow for 30 minutes. Probably am I ready for this? Should I read Blood Meridian, James? Is it going to destroy me?
Blood Meridian's a hard book. I have not read All the Pretty Horses. I went from Blood Meridian to The Road by Cormac McCarthy.
Really?
Have you read The Road?
No, when I started conceptualizing Watcher of the Damned, I actually stopped reading a lot of other things and started just writing my notes. So I've got a massive arc. And I was like, I really don't want to be derivative. I didn't want anybody saying I was derivative of a particular group.
Only ankle biters call things derivative.
I know.
Consumers call them fantastic when it's derivative.
No, I know, but it's just a matter of time. Once I get something in my head, it's so hard for me to break away. And I actually told John, John's one of the people I've read his book. Maji is one of the other ones I've read. And yours. I have a very few people that I will break away from my obsession to break away and read your stuff. And so I had made a commitment that I would read people that I knew needed my input. So, and wanted it. And so I was like, McCarthy probably won't miss me if I don't read his book. But if I wasn't
I'm going to recommend you don't read The Road.
Yeah, if I don't read, but I've heard so much about The Road. And I know that it's on my list, my giant freaking, oh my gosh, my to-be-read pile has gained sentience. It's literally alive now. It has its own intelligence. There are so many books that I haven't read, and I've tried to work my way through the library of physical that I have, which is just massive. It has books by Fermi, and it has textbooks from like the 1920s, things like that. It's just got everything in it. Of course, the ones that I consider to be the core of my childhood reading, which are Robert Louis Stevenson, Dickinson, Mark Twain, Twain is extremely influential in my work because he's very picaresque, and I actually wanted a picaresque story for Watcher of the Damned, an adventure as you go down the road. And of course, those have sort of fallen out of favor with some people because you're just going along for the ride. But I love picaresque, and so these authors, they're so influential, and there's so many of their books that I've actually gone back and said, okay, here's the authors that were influential to me. I want to go back and I want to read books of theirs that I haven't read yet that are still considered to be great. Just the sheer amount of time it takes to get myself out there and to read these books, I feel like I'm failing somehow when I don't read these masterworks by McCarthy or by other great contemporary writers, because it's so hard to find that time. And then that reminds me that every reader I have has given me that portion of their life that they could have devoted to another great writer. It inspires me. It really does make me feel like they're giving me part of their life. I want to make sure it's good enough. And so in some ways, that knowledge, me acknowledging my own frailty and not being able to speed read everything at light speed, means that I have to acknowledge that my readers go through the same things. That sometimes some of them take 2 or 3 months to read a book of mine, and they are dedicating themselves. It's not just grocery money, because they're spending money now that a lot of them don't have. Where I hear people say, I have to go and I have to buy these things, or I would love to buy your book, and it's literally like, you say these people are giving their lives to me. So when I say I haven't read McCarthy or I haven't read The Road, I know that I feel like maybe I'm not as educated, but I spent that time that I could have been reading McCarthy, reading you and reading John and reading Maji and other great people that I love, and Otter and the other ones. It's just a commitment. And so I know that when I get finished with Watcher of the Damned, I'm going to have therapy. That's the first one, because this has become such a huge part of my life, and the characters are very real to me. They literally, dialogue just flows, and they talk like they talk, and I can't stop them. And I'm going to have to do something. And so one of the things I thought about doing actually was, if you guys have suggestions, that when I get finished with Watcher of the Damned, I will actually tell you what I think about certain books, and Blood Meridian is on that list. And you actually prefer it to The Road?
So the Blood Meridian is, Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy is a horror show through hell based on real events. Remarkably well written, totally worth reading, I think, if you are prepared for it being hell.
Okay.
However, I read Blood Meridian. I was like, man, this is awesome. I gotta read more by this guy. So I picked up his second most famous book, more or less, which is The Road. And The Road was so brutally, utterly depressing.
Yes.
That, like, okay, he's a good enough writer that even if I hate the concept, I actually can sit through and read this. And so I did finish it. But it is a story with zero hope and just misery. Like, someone's going to hear that and go, oh, but the kid finds a commune. And it's just like, if you look at the world that was presented by this apocalypse, there is no hope. That kid is just going to spend the next few months starving and then die.
Oh, wow.
The Road is possibly the most apocalyptic apocalypse in all of fiction. I believe the prevailing theory is that he depicted a meteor the size that wiped out the dinosaurs.
Dude, yeah. Or like, it's almost like a Toba event, I believe.
Yes.
Is what we're looking at. And
the sun has been blocked out. It's been 2 years and all the plants have died. There's almost no food left. You can walk for 3 days, and you'll encounter one other person. They're going to try and shoot you for the 2 cans of beans you have.
And this became, I think, the influence of The Road and the way that it is affected. But also, we're talking about games, since you said you haven't played Fallout. Fallout is in that.
I played Fallout. I played 3 in New Vegas, and I tried 4. I just don't like Fallout because it's goofy.
Well, I love the goofy, though. That's me. I actually love Terry Pratchett with Discworld and other things. And there's a certain amount of goofy that I adore. He's another one that really.
Terry Pratchett is very good.
Yes, Terry Pratchett, Doug Adams, and that goofy weirdness. I think that was what they were trying to go for, and there actually is some of it that shows up more in New Vegas than it does in Fallout 3. Fallout 3 is really more of that misery, but you have a chance to create your own hope. And of course, then we have the Book of Eli, which is another take on The Road itself, except it has a different ending. It has a different way that it goes. And I thought it was very well done myself. Some people can't stand it. I loved it. I thought it was great. And I think you're right. There's only so much misery that we can take. So how do we, as apocalypse, why do we go to post-apocalyptia in the first place? Why do we want to be there? This is a very, when we look at why books are written and the age they're written in, and I keep telling people, go to write the story that is in your heart, the stories that you have. We have themes that we explore. We have things that have been affecting us since we were tiny. The ideas that we have of what is terrible or what might be good. We are a reflection of our time. It just as much as Tolkien or C.S. Lewis was, or Robert Louis Stevenson or anyone else, we reflect the times in which we live. If we are merely there to write the current thing, then we're going to fail. If we're merely there to reflect pop culture, we will fail. But if we are there to actually write the story that is within us, we can present a picture to the world of what our fears and our hopes were from inside of us in this year and this time. That's why I read Stevenson. I want to go back and I want to be on this sailing ship with him. I want to feel what it was like to be a 14-year-old boy, to be sailing the seas and to say, just forget everything. I'm going to go have an adventure. Or to be Mark Twain's characters and go down the river on my own and maybe fight some social injustices without ever really knowing it. People are going to read our books for the same reason. They're going to read your book because they want to read about basically this character that you created in Bastion, and they're going to explore this world that you've created. They're going to read John A. Douglas's books because they want to find out about this character that he's written and the struggles he has against the biases that are inherent in his own society, and some of them that are founded in true fears. What does this tell people about the age we are living in? What does it tell? We need to be able to write this, and apocalyptic stories are very much in touch with the fears of our age. We are not the atomic age where everything ends with the dropping of the bomb. We are after the bomb. We are post-atomic age. We are what takes place when everything has ended. Does it really end, or is there a way to survive? What is it going to be like when we fight for our own freedom, our own survival? And these stories could be what inspires someone to actually try to live. We don't know.
Have you read A Canticle for Leibowitz?
I've had parts of it. I have not read all of it yet. I know that it was a Prometheus Award winner and very good praised. And I believe, actually, I think I did read it, part of it in middle school. Actually, I was in my Isaac Asimov kick and would go just burning through that whole Ray Bradbury, Isaac Asimov section. And I believe The Canticle for Leibowitz was in there at the time. Was it written in the 40s? Is that correct?
I don't think it was that long ago. I thought it was the 60s.
Was it in the 60s? Okay, I've got to find out because it's one that I just recently actually looked up. Somebody had made a reference to it on the Prometheus committee.
1959.
And so I would love, tell me your take on this book, because you're mentioning it, and that means I'm excited.
So I bring it up because it is a thoroughly Christian take on nuclear, like life after a nuclear war. And I probably should reread it because I made this weird reading journey where after college, I got a job that had like an hour-and-a-half commute one way.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I'm going to go insane if I don't really get into audiobooks. And when you start out with like, all right, I need to like actually get into reading. Sure, okay, reading manga is fine. I've gotten my genre fill from manga. But I can't do that in the car. I should read some like actual literature. I am an adult at this point, and there are some books I'm embarrassed I haven't read yet, such as Dune. I read Dune at that time. And Canticle for Leibowitz is one of them. But if you tally that up, that means I read it like 5 years ago, and I've read probably 300 books since then, and written 10 books since then. So I need to go back and double check on it and check some.
It is 1969 is the actual date that it was written. So yes, it's in that. We were right in the middle between us. Still, what we would call the atomic age, and that the effects that was having around the world. Go ahead. I just wanted to throw that.
So without really giving away the ending, I will I'll put my foot in the ground here and say that it is actually a hopeful ending while acknowledging that people don't change, and it's hopeful despite that. And I don't want to give away too much because I might choose it for a book club later this year.
No, that's great. That is sort of lines up with Dying Earth by Jack Vance, which is another very...
That was last month. That is a goofy book.
No, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. The reason why is because the character, you've got to remember, once again, like I said, I'm 61 years old. So some of these books that I read, this has been 30 years, 40 years since I read them. I read Jack Vance when I was in my early 20s, so that makes it 40 years ago. Congratulations, I'm old. And so one of the things I loved best about it was the created woman that she sees everything, and it's seen through this
Very
veil
early
of ugliness. What was the name again? Tiara.
Tira, yeah.
Tiara,
I remember
and
right.
she sees everything through this veil of ugliness and depression and terror, and everything is terrifying to her. And when you read her story, especially how she meets the man who was deformed, his name again is escapes me, but he has this terrible deformity, and he looks so horrible. And she actually, for the first time, seeing him as she is, she spent her whole life being so horrified that she can't help but see him as he actually is and not turn away. Everything has been terrible to her. But at the time, I was dealing with someone in my life that was having that same issue, that everything to them was, she couldn't see the world with any beauty. No matter what was in front of her, it was all despair, it was all terrible, it was all loneliness. And to see that written so beautifully by Vance as he explores those themes of what it means to be a person who is created, perhaps imperfectly, and yet still lives and still exists in this world, and how we approach our own ideologies. I absolutely adore Vance for that, because he first of all, he hits it hard. A lot of people read Vance because they want to find out about his magic system, because they learn about him from D&D, and they sort of backwards into Jack Vance. I had actually started reading at the same time that I was playing D&D, and I read it more for my I read it more because I wanted to read about the characters themselves. And I found his characters very compelling, but I love the goofiness, the very weirdness of the Museum of Man as they go in. In fact, this is one of the things I love, because there actually was a Museum of Man. I'm trying to think if there still is one available. It was made to be sort of like the history of the world.
Yeah,
And so,
I don't think we have those anymore.
yeah, and they had actually, so it was the ribbon. He went to real places, and he would mention them as he would travel through. You would see these things in the distance, and it would reference forgotten worlds that we know. If you're from that time period, you go, wait, that is a building from the Chrysler Building or something like that. And so you would see these in the stories as he would go by. And in the Museum of Man, they actually encounter humankind and this demon of despair and consumption that just consumes everything. It's very much a play on the anti-consumerist movement of the 1940s and 50s, where they realized that just living just to create and consume is not always everything, and that we have to be more than just takers and consumers. And I love Vance for that reason. His post-apocalyptic vision.
Hey, this isn't the presidential debate.
Yeah, I know. Apocalypticos are very, very important to me, because Jack Vance is seeing it from that viewpoint of the post-atomic or atomic era, and he's looking at the possible ending of the world, and he's talking about that it could last, that even on a dying Earth, things are still beautiful and lives would still be lived, and that people would still encounter each other, and that we have a chance nothing has to be just constantly on the upswing. Nothing has to be just it's upward or no ways. There are times when you get on the back end of a dying society or the ending of an empire, and it's still important. It's still life. And how do we live it? How do we approach it? I think that Vance did a great job with it. Of course, I love Vance. And so if you said that to me, it's like talking about Star Trek, the original series, then I'm just going to wax poetic and go on, because I love it. Can't help it.
Okay, so to go back to the original way I was planning to segue into conversation after introductions, we both are in technically post-apocalyptic settings.
Yeah.
My main timeline, my main universe is post-apocalyptic.
Yes.
I am just now writing about what actually happened during the apocalypse, which gives me a technical challenge with how to do it. That still leads to a recovery and leads to a new form of a recovered society after. Because Bastion, my cyberpunk stuff, is in the year 2140-ish.
Yes. It's like,
and they're in this mega city of technology and bread and circus in a lot of ways. But it's after a apocalyptic event that destroyed our world as we know it. And I kind of did that for I don't know, ease for my own sake, where I specifically said, world ended in 2012. That is the divergence point. I am not going to update my timeline because, say, Russia invaded Ukraine by surprise in 2022.
Yeah.
No, I know everything that happened until 2012, and then after that point, it is my own creation. I never need to update it for new events.
Actually, and that worked well in the Fallout universe. They do the same thing. It's sort of like the world ends.
Yeah, the bombs drop in 1950 or whatever.
Yeah, and it just sort of catapults forward. We're already past that point where it's we're going 2077 or something like that. We're already headed there. So it's like there when you set up your worlds. It is super important that you realize that people are going to be reading it in the future, looking back at this date. One of the things in Watcher of the Damned is the date will never be mentioned that the happening actually happens. The reader can infer, but I have made a point to never actually point out when it might have taken place. There's a couple of hints that are in the first book about when it possibly could have taken place related to how Rose speaks and what she says. And that was done deliberately, but the actual date itself was left open. Because when I first started writing the book, and it was in episodes, it was actually done in snippets. I wrote the first section. I had a vision of what that first scene was. Actually, I saw it just like that and just wrote it within a matter of about 15 minutes. Knew almost pretty much what the whole world was going to be, what the whole story arc was going to be. I could see the beginning, the end, the middle, but not how to get from point A to point B. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to write this book about these particular events. And the time it took me to get those episodes written, then to decide, wait, this is actually a book. It's going to be a series. And the world had changed so much that some of the things were already starting to come true. Things that I had written that were supposed to be villainous or were supposed to be bad were suddenly being told by people that those are good now, that you should do this. And it actually is the way it happens in the book. And in fact, my son said, you really need to start thinking about what you're writing, because if this is becoming true, we're going to all be dead. And I was like, dude, I'm so sorry. Cannot change it. That's what it's going to be.
I can one-up you. However bad you think you are with your prediction. So let me jump in here.
Good. Throw down.
Because I grew up in the 2000s, and that's when I consumed most of my formative media, I do like zombies. Okay, I use a zombie apocalypse. And back in 2014, 10 years ago, I came up with most of these decisions for how to build this. And what I decided on was that it had to be a man-made virus, probably with a fungal symbiote, in order to get the zombie behavior, because you need something like a cordyceps infection to actually get zombies. There's one thing to just kill off people.
So much. Cordyceps creeps me up so much.
But the reason cordyceps will never get into humans is because we have good immune systems, and we don't get fungal infections unless you have AIDS.
Yeah.
So I needed a second factor of why the fungus is able to get into people. So I was researching respiratory viruses, such as ones that attack the immune system directly and cause things like cytokine storms. And I was like, okay, so respiratory viruses are a very well-known thing because we had SARS, we had MERS, these coronaviruses are a thing that are mutating and being studied. In fact, what places like the Center for Disease Control are doing are they're intentionally mutating them to make them more viral so they can get ahead of natural evolution. So I know that the CDC is doing gain of function research right now, and if that got out of the lab because of bad actors before they have a vaccine, that can get really out of hand.
Yeah.
I came up with that in 2014, and when I release this book, everyone's gonna be like, "Oh my God, you're talking about Wuhan! How dare you insert this into it?"
That actually, my book came out. It was during COVID. It had already been written and used, and I noticed that about your book as well. I'm almost, and I'm going to say this honestly, there is sort of a collective reflection. It seems to proceed. I don't know how, but you and I had almost the same thing. We talked about. I start writing in 2018, and it's a created virus created by a corporation to try to bring the population down to manageable levels, and instead they foobar the world is what they do, absolutely and completely. And of course, nobody knows on Earth what actually happened. Those who weren't part of it, that's the reason why the happening is so mysterious. They don't know what happened. They just know one day they woke up and everybody's dying and things are changing. only a few people are going to know that. And in fact, I wanted to reflect that in the story, that when you're on at ground zero with something taking place, unless somebody they don't drop a flyer with it going, hey, this is what's happening to you, and just want to let you know. Well, I wrote this story about a created virus that was designed to bring down the population of the earth to what other ruling elites considered to be a manageable level, and they really screwed it up really bad, and things went badly. But governments never cease; they just transmute themselves. Hence, transmutation Texas. Not only the people transmute, but the government itself transmutes itself to incorporate it into this new world. Because the only thing certain are death and taxes, and somebody's got to put the taxes out there, and that's it. And so we have this world. Well, that wasn't part of the landscape in 2018. I put this out in 2020, and they're like, well, you're writing about the virus. And I was like, no, it's not. It's actually a story about something different. And you're not the only person that's had this happen. We've had 2 or 3 now that we've talked to, and I'm sure that somebody watching this is going to talk about this, because we've seen this reflected. When I say that we reflect the environment we're in, we reflect the society. Those fears that we have, or those subconscious thoughts we have about what a government or what a group of people might do to us, are reflected in our writing. And I wouldn't be surprised that we have a lot of people out there who have some of those same themes that are embedded into their stories about overarching groups of bad actors, or usually governments or people that have something to gain from demise, out there creating things that could destroy the human race, and doing it deliberately. It's not even trying to hide it. These seem to be very common themes, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see more now. That it will change as we go forward from COVID, that we actually see these themes mute themselves, perhaps on the government critique, because there are people afraid of saying that, but instead will amplify the part where dangerous things happen when governments decide to play God. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that. But so that's one of the reasons why I tell people, don't try to write what you think is the popular, that narrative, or, oh, we need more stories about vampire ballerinas, which there's nothing against the vampire ballerina. If you love that vampire ballerina, you can keep your vampire ballerina. But we need to write the story that's within us, because otherwise we're going to not give that accurate picture of the world that we're living in as authors. And I think it's really a fascinating point where you and I and some others had this same concept just a few years before an actual event like this took place.
Okay, so let's talk numbers. How many people died in your happening? What percentage of people?
Okay, so we talked about this earlier. Actually, excuse me, I can't see. I had to wipe my eyeglasses. In the book, so the spoiler, here it comes, a few spoilers. So if you want to mute your thing for the next 15 seconds, go ahead and do it. In Watcher of the Damned, I based it on what we would call an extermination event. I actually used Toba as the model for it. And so we took probably, I would say 99.3 is what we ended up with. It is based on the Toba happening, so we used that model. But then we talked about how it was actually gender specific, and people don't realize that if you can actually kill more of one gender than you can the other, depending on delivery and what the actual mechanism of injury is. Of course, there's a suspension of belief in some of it, because I'm not a virologist. So we talked about how would you actually, if you're targeting a particular gender with endocrine disruption, what happens when you mess up the delivery. And you can actually end up with mass cytokine effects. That's one of them. And that's part of that was the cytokine storm, is that's the original die-off. But you also have an added effect that as you have this endocrine disruptor that is specifically aimed at women to disrupt pregnancy and the cycles, you end up with massive groups of heart attacks and heart failure, other things that take place, because if you do it wrong and you make that delivery wrong, you can actually kill women if you don't do it right. And especially when you're over a certain age group. And that is, of course, happens when you have birth control. We actually all know about it when we talk about those women who are over 35, used to be told you shouldn't ever use these particular type of things. You can, have a stroke and die. And so that is what that was based on. And we used the Toba model, because I am getting that right? Toba is Toba.
I think so, yeah. I didn't seriously research Toba, because I hear 99.3%. And I go, that's too many people for the needs of my world.
Toba was massive, and the fact that it and we say this because there are people who dispute it now. That's fine. They're going to have a different. We know that there are some places you don't have to have a global event. You can actually have a regional event if you're on that continent and it's, the Neolithic age or whatever age you're in. It's going to affect you, and so we know that there was a certain event that took down that population to about 77 people out of millions. How do you deal with that group that's just that group, and there's a certain inbreeding, there's certain things that happen and take place on it genetically. And so I wanted that event, and I know that that's not necessarily what we would call perhaps plausible in our own way of thinking, because we look at viruses and other things is that they have to have the host live. One of the things that we say when we're dealing with natural viruses, they want the host to live. Bacteria, they need their host to survive at some level. There has to be a way to pass from person to person. And if you kill everybody, the virus dies as well, unless you have a natural immunity or a way to deal with that. So you have certain populations that may have this massive die-off, and then you have another group of people, and a spoiler, that may not have that die-off because they have anticipated and either gotten a vaccination or they have a natural immunity. And so there are two separate populations, one that has this massive die-off, and then the other one which does not. And that is where you find that next gene pool, you find that next group. The question is, how do they get there? What were they created specifically for that purpose? That is part of the world of Watcher of the Damned, because a very high-tech world existed prior to the death of that high-tech world. And now you have this more primitive society, one that is clinging to the ancient tech that they still have, and it is not that far into the future. You only have a 53, 54 years in Watcher of the Damned with some extended life. Once again, we're talking about the potential for extending lifespans of humans beyond what we thought, what we originally were created for. And a lot of people have been experimenting with testosterone and other things, especially for men. It does extend life in some ways. I wanted to actually deal with a timetable, and this is what makes Watch of the Dam a little different, is it's not that far past the apocalypse, but it is far enough in the future that that initial die-off has already occurred, that civilization is trying to come back. So with that small population, they still have a chance to rebuild. And the reason that I can say this is plausible is because I've actually lived it. When I just told you that I read a book and it was 40 years ago, and I can remember most of it, maybe not all of it, it's in my lifetime. 53 years, I remember 53, 54 years ago because I was alive. So when
that is such a weird thing to have to remember when writing on long time scales, because I'll say something like, oh, Eve, the AI in my cyberpunk city, was created 40 years ago. Then I have to go, that means a 45-year-old or a 50-year-old will remember when she was released.
Yes. So you have
to remember. An 80-year-old remembers the founding of the city.
Yeah, and so that person, actually, the question is, are they going to be subversive, or are they just grateful to God that Eve exists? And I think that's why when we talk about your book, spoilers, that we talk about it as an actual character, that it could be a utopia. It is meant to help. It's not meant to hurt. It's not that dystopian. The system in Watcher of the Damned is actually created under the same auspices. It was
the government system, or are you talking about the Usenet or whatever what's your term for the cyber ghosts?
Yeah, well, there's cyber ghosts, and there's actually, you have the system itself, which is the system of government, which they just ended up on the system. You fight the system is what it was, because it was sort of a nameless entity up there of bureaucracy and groups of people that would meet behind closed doors, and you would have your elected officials. Of course, they were chosen out of a pool to represent you, actually, in reality. Pretty much, and then that became real too, and I was like, hey, that's exciting. But in this case, it's been around. But you have a system of government that was put in place, and it still survived the apocalypse. And they managed to get their representatives out there, try to rebuild what they thought of as civilization. And you actually have two groups of people there as well. A group of people that believe that this is the right way to live, and that if you put your hammer down and you make sure that everybody does everything exactly the way you want to, we can have this utopia. And another group of people that are having to actually try to support the people that want this. And they say, this is slavery and I don't want it. I would like to live my life and let me just be myself in peace, please. And therefore you have the insiders versus the outsiders, the world of Watcher of the Damned, who actually is a prisoner in this world, in this small group of people that are living in Texas 1880 without tech and some leftovers from the technological world. And then another world where technology still exists and still being used by the people who are trying to run this world and trying to bring it back into a productive life. And how you find out about them and that slow reveal on it, that's one of the challenges, because when you're creating these worlds that take books to reveal, I know that you get excited, because I know you do, when you drop like a little hint and it's like from the book 1 and you put this little hint like over there in book 5, you're really, 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 really hoping that one of those readers will see it and go, I remember when you said that. I remember when you talked about this thing. And then you're like, man, I got to get somebody to read all the way through it so they can do it. And so I was really excited.
I will jump for joy the day I find another YouTuber doing a lore deep dive, trying to piece things together.
That is it. And it's like, but people are into that right now. That's the thing. I don't feel ashamed of doing that at all, because when you
want to see it happen, it hasn't happened yet.
Well, but it will. It's going to happen. But you've got those readers out there. You've got people that are talking about your books. And remember, we live in a world where we're actually actively pushing against the publishing industry. They're holding this back. What happens when our books actually will break free? Any one of us, it could be you, it could be me, it could be John, it could be Maggie, it could be any of these people who will literally leap forward, and suddenly Lord Arter's book is out there, and it's like this, and people discover it 40 years from now, and isn't this fantastic? The reason I know that is because Lord of the Rings became very popular in the 1970s, but it was more or less a niche read until that point. It really was not widely talked about until the 1970s, or I say early 1970s. The brothers Hildebrandt started doing the beautiful illustrations, and they started coming out, and they were like, oh, I love this calendar. It'd be on a calendar. We had things like calendars back in the day, and they would have these beautiful pictures. And you'd be, I really want to read this book. It's got this great picture. But it did not really take off the way it did until the early 1970s, because it was discovered. Think about from that gap of almost 40 years where it's read and it's appreciated, but it doesn't just take over the world the way it did. And we have that chance too, James. Whether we live to see it or not, that's the question, but it's still there.
I'm young.
You're young. You're going to make it, dude. You're going to have to, if you see it, you're going to have to, like, ring, ring, heaven. Hey, Becky, guess what? You're got your book out there, because that is the hope that somebody is going to find these books and love them. I'm thrilled to death to know that people are reading my series. I love it when I've got a couple of them, they're very much that will call me and talk to me about it, or they'll text me online, and they'll say, this thing that I saw this, what did you mean by this? And we go back through it. And we actually they'll piece together something. Your readers are smart. The people who love your book to begin with, who read it and they love it to begin with, are smart enough that they will see the things that you leave for them, that breadcrumb trail that you're leading to that part of your world. They are going to find it right for the readers who love you. And when I say it, because we can all get caught up in when a publishing house puts out these, you should only write this way, or you should only write things according to this formula, or you have to write to save the cat, or you shouldn't write things with too big of words or too many descriptions.
Oh my God! Did you see that AI that the company is? Great. They're taking good books. Well, their example is The Great Gatsby, so maybe I'm speaking strongly. And they're just knocking it down like 7 grade levels of complexity with AI. And I think that's a good thing.
I think that we have a market opportunity here, that we should rewrite our own series in like really dumb, like put it for the dumbest character, and then let that person retell the whole story. So
I would hate to do that.
Oh,
you go ahead. You try that marketing stunt. If it pays off for you, let me know.
I said there was this guy. He was at the gate, but he was like really big and he was really ugly. I don't know what he was doing there, but anyhow, one day he met this girl, and they were like,
so the Deadpool strategy of his friend that can't stay on subject as he's retelling the story.
Yes. Yeah, why not? If they're going to do that anyway, let's go ahead and just take that market over and make, Watcher of the Dumb. That would be awesome. It's just I'm just gonna make Watcher of the Dumb, and then we're gonna like have that out there. It's gonna be fantastic. I will write my own parody series. It will be great.
Okay. So you have a Toba event. 99% of people are wiped out reasonably overnight, more or less.
Yes, with a reserve population that's hidden away.
So, without jumping over the events of the book, and let's ignore the fact that most of the survivors are now infertile. I know that's critical to your story, but let's just talk to numbers for a second.
Yeah, let's talk numbers.
If you take out, all right, we're at 7 billion people. I'm gonna pull up a calculator.
Yeah. I love people that do math because I hate math. I had to have somebody else do my math for me. I was like, do my math. And my son was like, okay.
So on the planet, it'll unless I missed a zero, I may have.
Yeah.
That leaves 49 million people on the planet. Which I guess is actually quite a bit of people.
That's actually not bad. Yeah, that's actually the Georgia Guidestones thing actually wanted it down to 500. I think it's 500 million or something like that. And so 49 million is actually quite a few. But when you're talking about space and
that's everyone scattered out. I guess also, that checks out with the co-op. It's what's the name of the place the Watcher is kept as a prisoner? The
Tejas co-op. It's the Tejas co-op. It's actually it's a co-op.
Okay.
Yeah, Tejas co-op. We want to make sure we didn't like accidentally take over somebody's name because a Texas co-op is probably like a farm stable or something like that.
I'm going to screw that up. In my Cyberpunk, I try to make like joke names for corporations. Yep. Like everyone drinks Zeus energy drink with a jolt of nicotine for you.
Yeah, I actually have Cognito Incognito Incorporated is the actual name of the corporation. The We Speaks Incorporated made their own shell corporation, Cognito Incognito. Spoilers. And they are the ones who ended up taking over the world government and having everybody do this. But it came from We Speaks, which was like Apple iPhone. And they created this universal communications device, of course, that everybody had to have. And eventually it became mandatory because, you know, what's at one time is necessary will end up being mandatory because somebody says you have to have it. And so that's how they end up being able to set up their own, you know, systems and do things, is making proprietary software that you can't even talk to your grandma unless you have it. I've never heard of anything like this in my whole life. And so We Speaks ended up being them. And of course, Cognito Incorporated being, and I actually made that as my LLC so nobody could take it from me. So I spent money on that.
You can name your LLC almost anything.
Yes,
I did.
Trademark it. Yeah. I made my LLC that and trademark Watcher the Dam. But yes, that incredible loss of people. We're so used to being overwhelmed by people sometimes when we live in cities, and the idea we think of 49 million people as being a lot of people, but when you spread it out across the earth and when you say, okay, are there pockets of places where people might actually exist? In the Tejas co-op itself, you're dealing with approximately 3,000 individuals, and they have been brought into that area. And there are barriers that we have not, barriers that are actually in place because the Tejas co-op is more than just an accident.
Right.
It is
what I'm afraid of happening because I try to keep like I always try to be realistic. I don't want anyone ever calling me out on something contrived in the setting that I just didn't think about, although it's gonna happen. The problem is you cut out 99.something% of the people, the global supply chain breaks.
Yes,
suddenly
absolutely.
You don't have plastic, you don't have gasoline, you don't have fertilizer. Cities are suddenly a horrible place to live because you're so far away from farmland and you don't have the transport infrastructure to bring food into the cities to justify having advanced industry, you know, service industry in cities. So people are going to be in the wrong places and they're not going to have the resources they need. They're not going to have the knowledge of how to improvise those resources. So even if you have a meteor wipe out 99 point something, I think the conclusion is after that, in the settling in, you're going to have another mass loss of life.
Yes, you do. One of the reasons that I put it actually 53 years afterwards is because we had to go through at least 3. You're going to go through, when we do, I've told you before that I actually worked in emergency management. We actually talk about mass casualty. We talk about big mass casualty. We talk about extinction level events sometimes just for fun.
You talk about like local mass casualty events, though.
No, we also talk about global at some point. So what would happen? Okay. Everything's local in the end. No matter what you do, it's going to be local. So
like a hurricane, you can bring in supplies. You have undamaged areas that can support the damaged area, right?
This is one of the main precepts behind the text, the Theos Koan. Why is it there? Why does it exist? It's because these supply chains have broken down. People have never really gamed in their mind. A great series I love is Life After Humans, and it does talk about it to a certain extent. But and this is
I remember that.
Yeah, I love it. Great thing. And in fact, we use that actually a lot when we talk about emergency services. But when you're looking at the breakdown of society, one of the first things you would have to do is to be prepared to go through at least 3 waves of deaths. You have the first wave, this initial wave of death from whatever the precipitating factor is. Your second is from the secondary functions, whatever happened. Somebody got an infection, somebody lived, but they can't find the things to eat. The people who don't know how to live outside of a city, there is that next wave of die-offs, usually from thirst. They drink the wrong things. They drink water that's tainted, or they get cholera and die. There's usually a mass from that. You'll usually die from that before you die of starvation. But starvation is, of course, the third leg of this. And that's why you have the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, because after famine comes war. And you always have somebody fighting over what's finally there. They finally figure out where it is, but somebody's got to get to it. So after those 3 waves, the 4th horseman comes in, and it is war. And in the wake of war comes tyranny, because somebody will always try to put down their foot on who will do what. You may have small pockets of utopias that exist because people have found each other and they're willing to try to work together. And this is me talking honestly, having lived off the land. I was actually was a primitive camping instructor for Boy Scouts of America back when they were Boy Scouts of America. I also worked with my local communities in hardening and strengthening supply chains, local supply chains. The biggest things we have to overcome in large cities, usually the fact that people don't even know how to get their next drink of water. Out here, it's making sure that people don't put up small fiefdoms and that we just push each other away and say, I'm living on my little piece and that's my well and you can stay away from it. We have to make alliances so we can take care of each other and to keep away the hordes of people that may be coming from somewhere else that don't have our best interests in mind. So when we're talking about those massive events, those casualty events, you do have that breakdown afterwards of the ones who are left, the toughest survivors. That's why they're called survivors in the book. They survived these waves. And in fact, as you go further in the series, it talks about the waves of death and what occurred and how it occurred. And because it is so fresh on the survivors' minds, I can say this and I'm so thrilled now. They're only 54 years after the happening. It doesn't feel that long when you've actually lived it. You wake up and you still have dreams about something that happened and it's 40 years ago and you're like in a cold sweat. You're like, why am I dreaming about it?
You still have nightmares about showing up to a test at school unprepared?
Yes. I had one the other day. I was walking through the hallway and I'm like, I haven't been here in a while. And I'm like, and I see my old teacher and I'm like, I'm old at this point and I'm older than my teachers. And suddenly I was 13 again. And it was like, literally, I just transformed magically in my own mind. Well, because that was one of the main reasons we put Water the Dam at that 53-year mark. They're just starting to reestablish agriculture. And the way they had to do it was to go in and find those banks of seeds that they could find to try to redo it. And they're reliant on slave labor to do it. They don't call it slavery. They call it public service. Yay, public service. Isn't that awesome? And then
you have wonderful newspeak in your series.
Yeah, I do. I love my wonderful newspeak. And because after all this, the same system is still in play. They managed to survive. They made sure they would. And we have our public servants that keep other people going. And they donate their time by working in the fields and doing other things. And of course, they've all been, condemned for some crime that they did. That makes it, feel morally acceptable. They're just now putting that back together again. And one of the most challenging things about the book is when somebody kills someone. It actually is, and in fact, in the book it talks about that in the case of Abuelita, that the Watcher couldn't kill the man who raped her because that was a resource that's not coming back. That the only people that can decide to kill for self-defense or other reasons is the government itself. In this case, in the system, it's Judge Leona. She is the arbiter and the ruler of all life. If somebody else kills you, you have to take it because they don't want to lose that other person. It's a big deal when you decide to condemn someone to death because there's no one to replace them. And that becomes labor. Labor becomes so, and some people have said, well, in that world, shouldn't you have labor where they would suddenly be the masters of their own universe? I can lift a rock above my head. No, it's actually the opposite thing. You are now a resource, and I will clamp down on it with everything I have. I will put you under my thumb and put you under the yoke. And we have seen this historically over and over again. Labor becomes a commodity, and the rulers who want that commodity will do whatever it takes to keep those people under control. And that is the mitigating factor for the opiates of the system, and why they bring it in, and why they are so eager when they finally figure out how to make drugs again, how to make alcohol. And I actually researched, because I've lived off the grid before. I've actually also lived I live on my own land. I do have electricity right now, where I couldn't be talking to you because I'm having to deal with my phone. But I do have some experience with that. And you can actually live. If you know what to do, you can live and you can make a life for yourself. But when you're talking about supplies and demand and no children, let's talk about that just for a minute, because that's actually happening in some communities across America, where we have places where the schools are shutting down because people no longer have children, because there are no longer families living there. What happens to those supply chains? What happens to those things? We're now talking about this taking place in some countries around the world. So this is a hot topic. It destroys supply and demand. So now you have these constructs in place to keep people under the thumb, to keep people where you want them to be, to keep them in a place where you can make them work for you. And you don't have to just keep a chain on their neck. You can put a bottle in their hand. And in fact, we can go back to former corporate, or not corporate, but business practices of the 18 and 1900s, where they literally would give an alcohol ration to their workers to keep them in line. In fact, that was also part of some militaries. An alcoholic will come and work for you when nobody else will, if you have a bottle right there at the end of the day. And so that's part of what that government is based on. I tried to be as thorough in my research as I could with the world of Watcher the Dam, because I wanted to accurately represent what it would mean to be 40, 50 years, and what a struggle it is just to build something. The other effect that happens that we don't talk about is it's actual simple. When you're in the survival mode, you don't go and build something for yourself when you can just walk into a building, clear out a few things, and push it back and make it work. Because you have to fight for that protein that you're getting. When you're out foraging, you have to fight for every bit of protein you can find. Protein is one of the hardest things to find. That's why hunting's so important. Try hunting when you're not. If you're like me, I'm 4'11". I'm like literally like I'm like the munchkin of the universe. I cry when I like see a bird fly over and I get sick. Fishing, I would have to go fishing. Me going after protein, I literally mapped this out for my scouts when we were talking about survival camping. How many calories a day do you need? What do you have to do? Just walking through and doing that hunter-gatherer thing takes all day long, unless you have protein. You better have some meat. You better have a way of getting some sort of food in you and some starch. Starches are incredibly important, and they're very hard to find. So when we're talking about this world that we create and how we go in and research it, it took me probably 2 years to set up all of the research. And I had already done a lot of it because it was just what I did. One of my favorite things is foragingtexas.com. It's actually Dr. Meriwether Vorderbruggen, who wrote an entire section on how to forage for food and the things that we find. And he was so important to me, I actually have him pitched him in the first book. And in fact, that the bandana that Rose wears is actually, I have it now with the names of Dr. Vorderbruggen and Dr. Ayer, the other doctor, on there, and they signed it for me because they're real people. And so I usually make a nod. I try to source my people, and I tried to be as plausible with it. And at the same time, there comes a point where you go, okay, when do we suspend disbelief? I get so wrapped around the axle that I get so focused on how could this actually happen. There comes a point where you go, okay, I've got enough. I think I can move forward. I mean, how do you deal with that? Because I know you're really into the research part of it.
Well, I do things like call on other people who have done a bunch of research.
Yeah, really. Find your researchers.
Yeah. Easier said than done sometimes.
Yeah, that's true. But how do you find them? I mean, literally, and I know you've got a secret pool. Like, there's like, you have your secret little book, that's like on your phone that like you open it up and it's like, no one shall ever have this. But you need to, because that is your lifeblood. I'm lucky that I've lived as long as I have, and I was actually able to do most of these things. I've been an EMT. I've been a primitive camping instructor. I've been a firefighter. I worked with emergency management, so I knew something about mass casualty incidences and the timelines that we were looking at for recovery for a community. But I was really, there were things that I had to go to other people, and Dr. Vorderbergen was one of them. And I was really blessed that I knew who he was, and I could say, hey, how are we going to feed these people? What are they going to do? But when you find those people out there, it's kind of like it literally is like finding a jewel. It's like you have you ever found that like person and you're like, oh my gosh, this one knows these things.
Yeah. So
Like,
we're past the hour mark. I need to start asking some pointed questions.
oh,
what percentage of people would it take dying from the disease itself before martial law has to be enacted, in your opinion?
you have to have people to enforce the martial law, and that's the reason why there's actually two.
Well, yes.
Yeah, that you have to have people that have the will and the ability. And have the enforcement to do it. And that's the reason why there actually are two populations in Watch for the Damned. One is the ones who are just suffering from this entire thing. And then the ones are those who have protected themselves to a certain point and have some resources. Barring that, so let's take that off the table. Let's pretend like there's not a world where certain people would like the other portion to die. Let's pretend that those people won't protect themselves. That something like a Toba event actually occurs or an asteroid event occurs where you can't just protect yourself.
Well, let's look at a zombie apocalypse is breaking out.
Yeah. Okay, so zombie apocalypse breaks out, eats everybody. We have
not everybody, because I think it's actually a rather low percentage when martial law would have to be declared.
Well, it would have to be, martial law would be declared, I would say, almost immediately, because first of all, if you're talking about having an extant government, okay, so let's make that example where there is an extant government, they're behind a gate or something like that. I think they would probably be within a matter of a week or less. The reason why, because first of all, government
curfews, sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'm talking like literally soldiers on the street with guns conscripting people.
Let's look at the actual real examples. Let's talk about it from a smaller scale. Let's look at Katrina. So we go back to Hurricane Katrina and we look at that example that was probably a week and a half. And you had soldiers on the streets and guns in their hands. When the government decides it's something serious enough to do something about it, they will do it. However, your problem is that you have a localized event. You can send an entire battalion or whatever to take care of that one thing. When you are spread out over an entire continent, and you ask yourself, I have 3 million soldiers. Let's say this, use that as the litmus test. You have a federal government of 3 million soldiers, and you have 330 million people in the United States. Your enforcers had better have an actual mechanical way of dealing with enforcement, because just boots on the ground will not be enough. You simply don't have enough boots on the ground at the right strength to take prevalence. So if you're talking about America, once again, it's actually a different scenario because citizens are armed. And of course, that means a lot of people go down who might not be the bad guy, because if somebody has bad eyesight and Granny's popping off zombies from the street, she's going to hit the wrong ones. That means you're going to have loud uniforms. If you have loud uniforms and they're saying, I'm the good guy, sit down, we're going to take care of it, please put your guns down. How many troops can you actually send out to do that? I think that you're going to see more martial law with a mechanical component, perhaps drone enforcement or some other kind, and it would have to be very clearly marked. Otherwise, that armed group of people are going to start taking out anything they think is a threat, including drones, troops, or zombies. But the real problem with the overall martial law is going to be the amounts of sheer square mileage versus population. So I think you're going to see martial law.
Okay, so hear me out.
Yeah, go ahead.
The respiratory virus starts its outbreak in Texas because I needed a fictitious location for a CDC lab.
Fine.
The terrorists intentionally got on airplanes and went to, say, Denver and other major airports to spread the respiratory virus. So by the time that virus, because they killed the researchers that had the data, so it had to be re-derived.
Yeah.
By the time that virus has been re-derived and they have even an estimate of its reproductive rate, that's probably 2 weeks, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say
at that point,
for COVID. It was about 2 weeks for COVID, 2.5 weeks.
Yeah. Well, depends. It was 2.5 weeks from it hitting America.
Yeah. Actually, I was on 4chan when we started talking about it. about what was happening. And it was like November the 29th or something. Actually, it was almost a month and a half before anybody really started to say stuff. It was crazy. Go ahead.
So because of the way that this disease is set up, that it is two agents working together that actually create zombies. The first reaction is responding to a respiratory virus, which is not you need guns to deal with that. It's like curfew and use the police department and so on.
Yeah.
And it's a few weeks after that when people start getting reports that, hey, like we're getting rabies like symptoms here. And then realizing that it's something more, that they need to be looking not for a virus, but for a fungus that's gotten into these people.
Yeah. You're talking about airborne. You're talking about aerosolized.
So the idea, because I wanted, this is somewhat forced because it gives the tropes, right? The idea is that the spores have a live version and a dormant version.
Yeah.
The dormant version is lightweight enough because it's dehydrated that it's airborne. But simply most people can fight it off. The dormant version, it can't take root faster than your immune system can get rid of it. But if you get a direct exposure from a bite from an active zombie, that's the live version of the spore.
Yeah. Well, also, and remember this: as you have if you have a 2-stage event, and this I think is what we've seen with some of the previous releases, anthrax, SARS, MERS, we have a situation where the first wave, kind of like we talked about with our death, first wave is the active version. It takes down the immune system, so even those who live through it, now their immune system is weakened. Then the dormant system takes over. So you have that second wave of dormant of that disease coming through. But one of the things when you're talking about is that you go from a populated area to a populated area, there's two things that will be in play with that scenario. You're going to have largest population areas get controlled. Yes, they're going to have that get locked down. But then you have the greater population who usually doesn't take it as seriously. There's a reason why, because now we've been lied to at some point. I have a tendency not listen anymore. It's going to be me and my gun, and you tell me what to do, and I may not be appreciative of you. But if you're having something fast moving, for instance, like in your story where we have these secondary symptoms, now the outliers are going to start seeing it. That massive martial law will be taking place on interstates and in the cities. As you go towards the outer areas, you're going to see these pockets where there will be places where people lock down their own areas. You think of it like a fiefdom. So you have tyranny happens usually in pockets. And what we've seen take place in the past, in history, and even now you have communication, but it can go down like that. We've seen it before. We've actually had recent examples where cell phones die. I guarantee you cell phones will die if they're incorporating martial law. First thing that will go down will be your internet and your cell phone. And then you will have an official word that will come out of people that are actually designated to give you your official word of what you're officially supposed to do. All the rest of us are going to be running around behind the scenes saying we're fixing to lock down, and we're fixing to go ahead and form up and make a perimeter. Now you're going to have pockets of tyranny that will take place. Some folks will call it strength, and there will be warlords, basically those warlord situations that will set up. And that's the scenario we've actually gained, is that you've got these warlords. Usually most rural districts, most small towns have groups of people that are authorities. They have the police, but if you're out in the country, it's also the local fire departments, it's local churches, things like that. And those groups.
Okay, this is all good because this aligns. This aligns.
Yes. So you're going to see separate entities pop up that will be, maybe they're aligned with that main narrative, but they will still practice their own version of what they believe will be the best thing for their people, or sometimes just for themselves. And each one is going to be different, because we've seen this in the past with county governments. Is probably the best way you say it. Look at county corruption, county government officials that were corrupted in the past and how that went down.
Nobody knows their local politician.
That's right. And so you have to sort of go back to that thing. But I think that it would actually break down to, you would have at a departmental level, especially out in sticks, you would have it to where they would go to their local church, or they would go to the local fire department, and they would say, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? You would be within walking distance. And walking distance is approximately 7 miles. So you would have people within a 7-mile radius of whatever that functional entity is. And that's the reason why when you're in Texas, when you go from town to town, almost all the old towns were 7 miles apart, because a man could walk 7 miles in the morning and get to where he needed to go, buy something, and make it back home in time. So that 7-mile radius is going to come in play unless somebody knows how to ride horses, somebody has something that can run. Maybe you can still get gas for your car, but 7 miles will become the most important radius that you'll see for people who are actually physically able to go down, attend a meeting, find out what to do, and then send somebody back to enforce whatever law it is that they think they're going to enforce.
All right. So what if, it's 1 month since the lab is breached.
Okay.
The government says, and the government is actually a bit more foresighted than you might think. And they look at the situation and they go, the disease is not what we're worried about. We have just had civil breakdown.
Yeah.
So we're not actually going to, we'll declare martial law, we'll have a curfew, we'll give ourselves our justifications for the cities. But actually what we're going to do is we are going to go to the farms. Because what needs to happen is armed convoys bringing the farms to the people.
Yeah.
And they, as things are getting worse, the military basically says, we know you're all forming your own communities. However, you don't have farms. We have the farms.
Yeah.
We are in the interest of the American people. We are going to be delivering you food shipments in exchange for you playing ball. And by the way, playing ball means we're going to conscript a lot of your able-bodied adults.
Yeah.
And
that occurs because that's also, you conscript able-bodied adults, you send them to a different community. That way they don't have a problem with shooting somebody you tell them to shoot. And
when you don't necessarily know who's infected and they're all just screaming at you and charging to get the food supplies, you kind of need to be able to shoot those people.
Well, and it's one of the reasons why when we talk about, and this of course is all in Minecraft, so we don't have to worry about anybody actually doing it. But when
I'm talking about a zombie apocalypse book.
We're talking about a zombie apocalypse, and it's really important to say that there are people out there who actually would have a counter insurgency, so to speak. Those who have thought of this and have actually said, this is how we would handle it if the government says we're going to be locking down the farms. Farms in the Midwest have a tendency to be very large. Farms, as we come to Texas, in my neck of the woods, although some of them are thousands of acres, a lot of them are just 200 acres and some cows. And when you start talking about, once again, about, yes, bread is the important part. It would be shutting, not only putting out checkpoints. The first thing they would want to do is they would want to stop movement. Because when you stop movement, those people are going to stick close to home. They're going to take instructions. So you immediately cut off the gas supply. You make sure that happens. You make sure you cut off communications. So you have no gasoline to run your car. You have no communications other than what you are officially allowed to have, and it may be monitored at that point. And then you have an official that will be sent to that community who listens in and finds out what's going on at the top level. So you have the handlers that are sent out to that point to say, okay, here's our representative, and they're going to be talking back and forth, and they're the only ones that are really allowed to have communications and movement. And then you're going to shut down any sort of resistance at the community level. The only way to stop that from happening is to, first of all, have some resiliency in the farming communities, which they do have, is you have diversification with everybody having or not everybody, but people having a backyard, chicken coop, and people having a little garden or something like that. And these are things that we've encouraged in our own community because we said that's where resilience starts. You have a way to get water. Water is the number one thing. When we had the freeze in Texas in 2021, and I stayed for 2 weeks without power and without water. I had no heat except for the wood stove that I had in my front room. And we got water to our people because we had to think outside the box. There was no water in the community. We had everything shut down. We sent the fire trucks to the one place we had to drive down there with ice on the roads. We got somebody who would be brave enough to take the tankers down, fill up the tankers, and bring them back to our community and fill up the water jugs from the fire department so we could do it. But when you deal with a movement, now you can shut off things like water. Water is actually the most critical point, and it will happen before you have food. Because if you can shut off water, then you can stop people from surviving. They will do whatever it takes. You go 3 days without water and you're starting to really want it, and you will do almost anything that you need to do to get it. Now, people were melting snow while they had it out there, so at least they weren't thirsty most of the time. You get thirsty and you will do whatever it takes to get your baby some water. You can bring a population to its knees faster by turning off its water than any other way. And the fastest way to do it is simply send somebody down to turn off the spigots and say, don't come here or I'll shoot you. So that's what you want to prepare for. And you say,
but if you're in like the suburbs, I don't think the utility company can shut off your water except by going to your house. I don't think they can remotely kill your water.
You actually shut it off at the source. You have to know how water.
I mean, you can shut off the entire water system.
Yes.
But you couldn't say, hey, District 3, you aren't cooperating, you don't get water.
Well, that is actually how it's been done. In fact, if you look at Sarajevo and other places where they had massive uprisings, and it was very sudden. You had what would technically be a first world country suddenly descend into third world chaos. And one of the ways it happens is you take the water plant. So you take the water plant down.
Well, yeah, you can shut down the entire plant.
Yeah, so then you shut down the plant, and then you turn on systems only at certain times of day. You will have water, but you will only have water at this station for this long, so please line up and please go get your stuff. You've now just enforced order. By doing that, you're able to enforce order quickly because people will say, I'd love to, go fight your war, but I got to go line up at dawn so I can get a jug of water for my children. And so you have people standing in line and acting right. You can have 2 or 3 people at maximum with guns at that spigot. And all you have to do is protect that spigot. Everybody else will line up and they'll stay in line as long as you say, you don't get water and I will shoot you if you get out of line. They will stand there all day long and do exactly what you tell them to do because they want that water. So the only way around that then is, does somebody have water that is available to them without government control? And that would be a well or a pond or a creek. And that is the only way that they can really. But they do have.
I could probably work with that pretty good. So the story I'm reading right now is in like early 2013. The apocalypse is only 6 months in, and it's not even the body counts aren't even that high at that point. Because by my math, actually, if the goal is a 90% reduction and then a rebound, taking into account the civil strife and the starvation and the supply chain and all that, it actually needs to take a couple of years to kill that many people off.
Yeah, it's going to take at least 2 years. I think that if you're talking about those 4 waves, like I said, the 3 waves of death, and then follows this war or tyranny. People lost.
So early 2013, I think it's reasonable to say that they haven't resorted to that yet because the government or the armed body in charge of America feels they have control by controlling basically the food shipments.
Yes, and
that can escalate to water control because right now in early 2013 in this apocalypse, you can still turn on the lights.
Oh,
like
really?
people have furnaces running in the winter.
Yeah, that actually could make sense if you have enough people if they and we've talked about this actually where when you have a big freeze or something like that, the people will go in and they will actually shelter in at the local power company. Now, there used to be a thing called a local power plant. It would actually power the houses that were around it. In fact, we have one down the street. Yes, and so those, if you have a group of people that are actually dedicated to, we're keeping the lights on no matter what. I'm keeping it on because my kids at home need it. Mama's going to stay here and run this, this generator. That can happen. And if they're in there and they're really socked in and they basically form their own enclave of people that are dedicated to keeping this power going, you can have that. When you have a decimating type of illness, one that is catastrophic in its death, however, you will start to see certain systems break down. And in fact, you're seeing this in slow motion in some of our own lives when you're talking about maintenance. Maintenance.
Like what's happening in South Africa.
Yes, absolutely. When you see maintenance start to break down, that is actually probably your canary in the coal mine, because people will go and they will work on the machine.
Ooh, I could have a downed power line. That could be a great plot point.
Well, actually,
I'm an apocalypse that still has electricity, but like nobody's out there rerunning lines and stuff.
No, they won't. It took us 2 weeks to get power not because Texas is horrible. I love the Texas power system. I'm not going to ever down. You know why? Because they got my power back on. It worked. I had an inch of ice on my lines, and they came down. And there were so many miles and miles and miles all over Texas of power lines that were down because we usually live in a more temperate environment, and so we weren't built for it. And so literally we waited 2 weeks seeing those trucks come up the road. Those guys and gals were tired. I don't care. I stood on my front porch and I cheered when they rolled by because I had waited for them to come, and we heard them coming because there was no sound at all, because there was just ice and silence. And so that group of people that would go out have to have gasoline. They have to have trucks that run. If you're 8 months or 6 months into this, you're going to see that you're going to have your fleets of trucks start to run out. The gasoline and the fuel, what are they using? Is it preserved? Do they have the preservatives in it? Are they able to get a fresh supply? Because the new gasoline supplies now break down so quickly and become bad, sometimes within a matter of months. So if they don't have that gasoline, it starts to affect your engines. It starts to break down the components. And so
that's a great thing that most apocalypse writers forget. They think you can just find a jerry can of gas 40 years later. It's like, no, that is chemically different.
You can
maybe diesel.
You could refine a gas if you had enough. You could, if you had enough time. That's where we are with Watcher the Dam. They're attempting to refine some old crankcase oils that are finding and refurbish it to make it into a burnable fuel. And that's actually part of the story. You do have some industry. You have some things that are being created. And it takes that long. It takes decades to get to a point where you can actually do that sometimes. When we see places in the world where they have not recovered from apocalyptic events, it's usually because of the lack of parts and because of the ability to get from one point to the next, and fuel is critical. And that's the reason why biofuels would be a lot more important, because you can actually create diesel. Of course, then the question becomes, is your engine going to run? If you don't have a diesel engine, how are you going to even run it? You can have all the biofuel in the world, but if you only have electric vehicles, how are you going to run it? Well, maybe you can run a generator.
There were no electric vehicles in 2012.
I know.
There were a few novelties.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the reason why it's so crushing when you see how far we had come with biofuels. Only go, well, now we don't even want diesel. But the truth is, you could get your diesel to run a generator that might be able to crank up your electric vehicle. There's always a workaround.
You can use a diesel motor to generate electricity for your batteries.
Yeah, that's right. So you have, but somebody has to know it. Someone has to know. Without the internet, how are we going to know? And the words are reading a book. Somebody better have some physical media somewhere, and it better have that old stuff in it, or they're not going to know how to do this thing. And that's why.
I mean, like with this kind of zombie apocalypse, if it takes 5 years, well, it's not like I'm disproportionately killing old people in this apocalypse.
They're going to die.
I don't think people are going to forget all this stuff. We do have a functioning economy right now.
Yeah. So that's
in a Toba event where you lose almost everyone. Yes, you will have massive brain drain.
Yeah.
I think I'm dodging that issue with my setup.
Yeah, because you're in the middle of, you're actually in the middle of the active dying, the second wave of active dying.
Right.
And so that means your great die-off is still occurring. Somebody in your group, because you actually have a little time between it's taking place, I think that somebody's going to seek out someone who would know it, or they will break into an old library somewhere where they haven't completely stripped the shelves. Probably the most likely place they would find it actually would be in some old person's house on how to make something or how to do something. And if they find that, then they'll find that treasure trove, and that would be the easiest way for you to go and get them to that point where they could find it. We actually have that happen in Watcher of the Damned, where they find books, and of course Rose is Rose is not supposed to read certain books. She's been taught all her life that there are forbidden things that she mustn't ever read or look at. You can only have what has been on your accepted list. And she starts to learn about the world around her, what's really taking place when she sees this. The Watcher, on the other hand, has been reading everything he can get his hands on for the last 53 years when he could. And he's the one who actually brings in a lot of the books because he considers them to be valuable. But he's coming out of a society where they didn't really save books. They had everything digital. And as a result, books became far more hard to find. And in fact, they are becoming far more difficult to find. Look around and ask yourself, how many friends do you actually have that have physical media in their houses? Now, you probably have more.
Yeah.
But
more than all of my friends combined.
That's right. And do you know people who have absolutely no physical media at all? Or maybe just one or two things, but they don't actually have a library. They don't have books. They don't have.
So most people I know basically have, like, they don't throw things out often. is what I think is the case. So they will, for example, have all the books they had to read for high school still.
Oh yeah, that's good. No, that's awesome actually. At least you know that.
All right, so let's see here. Military has taken control of critical supply logistics. They have cut deals with the local warlords, such as the antagonist of the book I'm writing.
Good.
On a larger scale than this particular novel, because the book, this manuscript takes less than a week to go down because it's the mysterious stranger shows up to this enclave that's tense to say the least.
Yeah.
And he breaks the power balance, and things go wrong. Yada yada yada. Plot. Tune it. Buy my book when it comes out. But on the bigger time scale, what kind of needs to happen is most of America consolidates because they just have to keep pulling in. And you get to the authoritarian state rises in kind of Midland America.
Yeah.
Well, that's what leads to Bastion, and there's political upheaval and whatever, and we end up in 2140. But in 2140, when there's 1 billion people living in Bastion, there's also people living in what they call the Isles, and that's what book 2 largely relies on. Because book 2 is a manhunt for a teenager, basically, that accidentally kills somebody and goes, well, I got to get out of here. And instead of running to Mexico, you got to run to the Isles. Because the Isles is like the one commune that grew large enough that they could tell the government, no, you are not assimilating us. So they're like the one free spot in North America. I think it's going to be because Detroit turned into such a mess because the Isles are northern Michigan. Like literally the capital is going to be in Drummond Island because it's isolated water. It's a large enough property. Then they expanded out, and just because of the zombies in through Ohio and Indiana and Detroit and all that, the authoritarian state couldn't really exert control that far north. So they managed to keep independence. And that is specifically far enough north that they'd be on their own water system. So I like that idea.
Yeah, I think that you're looking at that. The potential for tainted water is actually a big deal in Watcher the Dam because you have to look at the water and how and that's one of the primary concerns that the travelers have is how they get their water. How they're going to keep it, fresh. Or where is there a fresh supply of water? How do they distill it? How do they make sure that it doesn't have something in it that could give them cholera? And in fact, it becomes a bigger and bigger deal as we go through Watcher the Dams. One of the things you have to have is you have to have smart guys. You have to have people who know how to create systems of sanitation. Why nobody wants to talk about this? You're actually talking about it. And it's in Watcher the Dam, one of our main characters. Watcher the Dam is in stages. We have the world building stage, which is books 1 through 3, where we have the reveal of the system and the world that they're living in. And then we go to the second phase of it, which is books 4 through 6, where we meet the other characters. We have our main characters show up in books 1 through 3 as we go to the city of Purgatory, one of the only cities that is really out there that isn't officially a city. And it's still under a control, so to speak, but it took a long time to get them that way, and they had to have a lot of help getting it there. And it's the wild town, it's the Wild West out there, but they have their own ways of doing things, and they are able to have that power because an engineer is actually one of the bosses of the town. And one of our most powerful characters, that's our secondary character that you will meet, is a civil engineer. He knows how to create systems of sanitation. He's actually sent in by the system because this town could be everything they want it to be if they can just get people healthy enough, if they can just keep them from getting sick. And one of their big concerns, of course, is cholera. And so they're able to get that under control by means of creating systems of sanitation, which sounds so simple. In some ways they are. It's just keeping
simple.
Sounds simple. If you've ever put
how complicated it is to put in fluoride?
Well, you say that, but in reality, it's about keeping your groundwater clean and make sure that your sewage is going somewhere else. It's about redirecting it. And then you say, if you're redirecting it, where does it go? It goes into the lake. And if it goes into the lake, are you really going to want to drink that? No, you're going to have to get your water from somewhere else. And so, or if you're going to get it from the lake, are you going to purify it? Do you have a purification system? How do you work these things? The engineers become so incredibly important, and we don't often put them in that position of heroism. We should. My father was an engineer, actually worked on the Apollo 11 project, and it's one of the reasons I'm so careful with my science, because he raised me to be a scientific mind as well as a person of faith. He had both. There was never a conflict between my faith and my science. I believed in both. My father helped put a man on the moon. He also helped create the triply redundant safety systems for the tree stay submarine. He was an incredibly brilliant man, and he taught me that you have to have people that think these things through. Without it, civilization can't rise. So we have an engineer that actually comes in to help this one city create this particular system. When he does, he becomes an important person in the revolution, because there are other places that could rise if only they can get past the day-to-day struggle of just survival. And as we move outside the systems of government, you have to have people who know how to keep things clean, how to keep people fed and watered, and how to keep people sheltered. Those three elements are incredibly important. If you don't have those, you cannot mount a successful revolution. And you have to be able to bring those people away from a system that rewards them. There has to be a motivating factor. Why would they ever leave that if they are given everything they want? You have to have a motivating factor, and that's one of the spoilers and watchers of the dam. Why would they leave in the first place? What is their reason? We need those people in every story that we're writing. We have a chance to give people the reason we love these stories so much, these post-apocalypse stories, is because they give us a chance to say, what if? Whether it's a zombie apocalypse, or a virus that wipes out the world, or a world of tyrants, and we want to fight to be free. It gives us a chance to think about how we might accomplish this in a fictional setting, of course. And we would never want anybody to think that we were being another way, but it's a chance to teach. And as a teacher, I was a certified teacher for 30 years. I'm actually still a certified teacher. I've kept my certification. And we have a chance to teach people, how do you survive in a situation like this? Every time that you go in, James, and you actually study what you're talking about, when you write for that research that you're doing, you are teaching someone how they could live, how they could actually overcome these situations. And it's one of the reasons why when I do something in Watcher of the Damned, to the very best of my ability, when I describe an event that the characters are going, when they're riding through the wildlands and they pull over and they say, we're going to make something to eat, we have to find food. They actually can find food that is in that area that would be useful. Or when they're trying to create a system or a field, a latrine. Field latrines are the difference between life and death for a camp. You can't stay in a camp more than 2 weeks and not have some horrible disease break out unless you have your systems of sanitation in effect. We actually talk about how to create a field toilet. We talk about how to create those bridges that you could actually make to get yourself across a small stream or a ford. It seems small until you try to get across it. If it's more than 6 feet deep, you're going to get swept downstream. We have a lot of those things in there. I took it as a personal challenge that I wanted to teach someone, that if they needed to survive, they could go back and they could say, wait, this might actually work. And I wanted to do it in such a way that if they attempted something, they would go, okay, this actually, if I do these things and I'm safe, I could do it. And it's a huge, because we never want to write something where somebody would actually kill themselves. That's the big part. I leave those little parts out when they're making medicines or something like that. I sort of leave that blank, and then she mixed, this and mysterious thing here. And then we go ahead and move through it. But when it's talking about how to get across a stream, there is a way to do it. And I usually draw a little diagram like my dad would draw on a napkin, because I want people to know you can actually cross a stream without a river, without a bridge. You use the current to swing you across. You actually go against swim against the current with a belaying line, and your friend's over here with a rope, and you go whoop, 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 and you can actually swim right across. Of course, you might get yourself killed on a rock if you're not careful. There's dangerous things, but we have a potential to actually share things and to game these scenarios and these situations in such a way that we can help people in the future know something they didn't know before and have a great time learning it.
Yeah, so I don't get into like survival situations, but I try very hard to never like inaccurately portray medical information or injuries or weapons or mental illnesses and stuff like that. the Hollywoodification of violence, I think, is horribly dangerous to society. Actually,
Yes.
like the classic example is the 100-pound soaking wet blonde girl beating up a 300-pound behemoth because she's just practiced. And they'll show her getting, the little spy girl getting thrown through a wall and then just brushing herself off. And she's like, no, people think that there are actually people that think that's how that works. And it's not.
Well, it isn't. And that's the thing. So having my dad, we talked about my father, and he was incredibly influential on me. He was actually a World War II veteran. He was also one of the first provisional rangers. And he taught me on our combat. He tries to teach me. Like, that was he just knew I would if I tried hard enough. I literally do have a situation where when things happen, I freeze. I actually freeze. I will literally, Rose, I am at that point. I married through the freak out of that one because I'm like, nobody knows what that's like till you just realize you're that little deer in the headlights. Something bad is happening. I just sort of sit right there and go like, hey, this is great. And so, but my dad taught me martial arts as much as he could without trying to, cry in the corner. And and so there's that dichotomy there of I know what to do as long as I'm not so scared I can't do it. If I think I've got it under control. And I know there's that one move my dad taught me, and actually Rose uses it. She hooks it. She actually does an ankle sweep, and you can actually hook and sort of pull somebody. If you do it just right, you put the ankle up here and you push back, the bigger person will fall down if they're not prepared for it. On the other hand, that bigger person, you better be prepared to run and run fast because now he's mad. And so my father said, if you get somebody down, you better run. You better have a place to run to because otherwise they're going to kill you. They will. You make him mad, you're dead. And so it was important to me to establish Rose as a physically realistic character. She is not a 100-pound soaking wet fighter girl. She knows how to shoot. She's a good sniper. She's good at that. She's an excellent shot. And she has a spoiler about why she's such a great shot. She actually does have a few spoilers about why she's so good at it. But although she knows martial arts, she knows just enough to get herself in trouble with the Watcher, and she does. I wanted to show him as actually a man who knows what he's doing. We have a tendency to, because it's funny, you say, oh, geez, that would be so funny if the big guy got, slapped around by the little guy or whatever. It's not the way the world works. And actually, as a person who's been a survivor of a person trying to sexually assault me, being in that situation, I tried to portray it realistically in the book. There are places where it is a very, when we talk about it, it's hard because a lot of times you talked about Hollywoodification. The Hollywoodification of, it somehow becomes sexual assault. When you describe it brutally, it literally will make you sick. And being able to do that tastefully without horrifying somebody so much that they just put the book down and go, I'm never reading again. But to be able to say, this person went through this thing. And there's a point where you fade to black and then you come back in it and you say, this is how they have to deal with the situation. How do they go on with their lives? How do they move forward? How does this person that's 100 pounds soaking wet, if she cannot beat that guy, how is she going to deal with him? You have to have some thought about it. And Rose is going to have to make alliances if she's going to live that way. She lived fine for that 6 weeks that she was in the wilderness. She actually is in the wilderness for about 6 weeks. She had her dog, and that was Barnaby, and he helped her with everything. And then, as those who have read the book know, that's one of our first big heartbreak scenes is actually Barnaby. And she looks at her life realistically, of her without Barnaby, of her without these people in her lives. How do you survive on your own? It's by stealth. I can tell you that as a person who's camped in the woods by myself, that's actually gone out, you don't go out looking for the bear. You stay out of the way and you make your little hidey hole and you make yourself as safe as possible. And if you can get up in a tree, you do. And then you wait. And you stay there as long as you can. But once you decide you're going to engage, you have to decide decisively and complete the work. And if you don't, you're probably dead. And so that's the reason
I read
why
your volume 1. I can only speak to your volume 1.
Yeah.
In the realm of all the survival and the nature and all that, I found exactly one thing I disagreed with, which you said you have math on otherwise, which is I didn't think there would still be supplies 50 years later. I thought that people would have been more efficient about collecting supplies out of houses. But apparently you had the actual equations. Everything else was perfectly good when I read it.
Thank you. Well, I did actually go through. I actually went and I looked up the you know what's the hardest thing to find out lifespan on? Two things. First of all, we talk about half-life or the shelf life of items. And people are absolutely freaked out when something has that expiration date on it. They just go nuts. There's some things that are terrible, and there's some things that are okay.
Yeah.
The other thing is
million-year-old Himalayan rock salt expires next year.
Yes, no, don't do it. But the thing about people actually going out and scavenging, and we talk about, so if you have 3,000 people in the area the size of the Tejas Co-op, and let's talk about the brutal reality of it. I just posted today, somebody saying, you probably saw it, I have the Hogzilla there, the Borzilla.
I did see that picture. That thing's ridiculous.
Dude, freaking huge. No, they're down I have them near my house. Do you think?
Yeah, random monster encounters are real.
No, they're real. I had an 800-pound pony, Cloudy, my pony, right? Little sweetie pony, was a Shetland. It was 800 pounds. Dude got his head ripped off by something in my bottoms over there. His body was over there. His skull was over there. And he was taken apart, and there was a paw print this big, and I took a photo of it, and I sent it to my veterinarian, Dr. Bennett, who was absolutely fantastic. And he said, that's a cougar. And I said, yeah, I kind of figured, because that's what takes that. And that thing's still living down there in the bottom. It's over there. And I don't go down there by myself. I take a gun. So let's talk about that. So as you get people together and you have scavenging, and actually have scavenging parties. And I actually did the math on how long is it going to take to go through different communities to get where you need to go to bring the items back. Do you want to take you're breaking into different areas. You would actually have a scouting party that would go and say, okay, we want to get this stuff, and then we're going to send the truck. Well, if you send the truck in, you're saying, what do you actually want? Most of it's going to be dead by that point. You are right about that. Canned goods, surprisingly enough, can last for a freakishly long time. Sometimes,
except for tomatoes.
Yeah, don't take tomatoes. Yeah, tomatoes will start eating out anything now, unless it's coated. You can coat those. You have the coated cans, and we can assume that if we're in a future population, that they might have some technology that would help. Freeze-dried things, you can last forever. You have ammunition, things like that. And you can talk about the fact that, yes, they have come through. And in fact, if you go further in the book, there are places where that have already been salvaged down. So we actually do cover that, where there's places where it's already been salvaged, parking lots, where they have the power plant, and there was a parking lot and it was still left there. They actually had already gone through there and salvaged, so there was nothing left to get by the time the party gets there. But with the Watchers group, and I know what you were thinking, man, they've got to already have gotten this. I looked at the population of my local area.
50 years, come on.
Yes, 50 years, dude. Have you seen what this area looks like? Have you gone through this Greenbrier? But anyhow, as I was saying, 50 years. I'm here, and I'm in a county. I actually based it on my own county. So I'm actually writing, and I actually used Google Earth to plot it out. And I plotted current population, added extra to it. And then I put in, so you have pockets of population around the lakes and other places. You could almost take 50 years if you went in and you said, I'm going to go in there, get what I can, carry it out, try to make it out alive. And let's say that you do it once a week, that you go out and you send a scavenging party, because you're not doing it every day, because you don't have
that once a week is probably the big difference in our math.
That's right.
And I've used scavenging as like you should have people doing that every day.
You could have people doing that every day if you can afford them to be gone. And that's the thing. And also,
bringing food back.
Well, you're bringing food back. That's if you survive. So how are you bringing food back? So let's talk about the fact that if you're bringing it back, let's say that you're bringing it out in packs, or you have rolling stock. So we call it rolling stock. That means your wagons and things like that. If you don't actually have a good, you're not using the roads, because the roads are covered in debris, because those wrecks and things like that occurred as they break down. Having been a firefighter, I can tell you right now, those wrecks break down, and that's those shards. So you're not going to take your tires, your little wagons and stuff, and they also break down too. So you're not going to take them down the road. Instead, you're going to take it through the woods. Okay, so let's talk about those woods where it's actually literally greenbrier from the top to the bottom, mesquites with thorns, and you're also going to have all of your cedar and things like that. So you have these thickets that you have to go through to get to these houses. Then you go to them and you're pulling this wagon. So let's say you have to have a man who's just there just to guard you from whatever critters it is out there. And that includes the chupacabras, the hogs, the bears, which we do have some out here. Gators, we have gators, y'all. We've got the cougars. So even if I don't include something like a chupacabra, I got all that other stuff here. So now we're going to say that they're completely rampant, that they have been growing in population and number. They finally overcame that testosterone hump that they had to get through, the infertility of all mammalian life, and now they're just populating this planet. So the lakes are full of gators and everything's full of all this crazy stuff. You now have to have 2 men who do nothing but to protect you, while you have one person who does nothing but pull that wagon on the way out and one on the way back. Or you can simply have a small group that actually goes out and all they do is go up the road and down. They bring back what they can. They mark where they've been and they keep it within a radius. And they say, okay, we're going to want to have these certain things. And then there are several types of medications which actually can last for decades. And I had to go in and find the Armed Services guide to which medications could be used sometimes decades afterwards. And it was incredible. It was incredibly fascinating. One thing you don't want to use is tetracycline, terramycin. It actually breaks down within a matter of months and can turn poisonous. So there's a lot of crazy stuff out there. So you're sending a party out into a hostile world. You're bringing them back. You have some that do bring in, and you actually are introduced to the Wildland Express in the second book, which is that's a spoiler alert. So the Wildland Express actually does go out, and they do nothing but scavenge, and they bring these back. But you still need a local population that says, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get these things. So you have them, and they're going out with their own territories, and they're saying, we will go and explore the places that are really not accessible to the Wildland Express. We're just a 1 or 2 man crew. Meanwhile, you have an entire group that's dedicated to nothing but scavenging and moving goods, and that's the Wildland Express, and you'll meet them in the next book.
Okay, so we're getting long in the tooth on this stream.
Sorry, you asked me to be here.
I do want to say hello to Tank Ferret. You are not crazy. Hey. I did cut my hair.
It looks good.
Thank you.
I love
you, Shield for me now. I just want to check. You read one of my books. You read a book with quite a bit of fighting, which may surprise anyone who sees I market that book as a romance. Be honest. How do you rate the believability of the fights?
I love your fights. Okay, so the thing about your fights is that they're your style reminds me of the Mike Hammer series. It really does. And so that's very hard-hitting language. You use a lot of noir. And so I love that style to begin with. So I'm already biased. So, but the way that you stage and you choreograph the fight scenes is important because it's not so much drawn out of he did this swing and then she did that thing. It is the way that the action is described that really carries it. You have an energy in the action. It's how you describe it with the language you're using that makes it so realistic. You can actually sort of feel the crunch of bone. And I love that part about it. That ability to describe action is what's missing in so much of what I'm reading lately. People are very good at choreographing. They're good at telling me he did this with his fist. He swung and he made a haymaker. They're missing the descriptors. They're missing that, and you have that. So that is one of the reasons why I love what you're doing so much with your work, because your descriptors are what carries your work, and it's not just the fight scenes. It's also in the actual urban environment. Your urban environments are my favorite. I'll be honest. It's just I love that, and I've already told you about that. As a person that's losing my eyesight, I love how you go to the smell of things, and how you go to the feel of it, the texture of clothing. That was one of the things, just the way that I think you were describing a character that's had the big ruffle around their neck, and you were talking about the texture of the ruffle, the fact that it looked like it was almost like a crisp, smooth texture, and I could actually see that in my mind's eye. You have that same ability with your fight scenes, so you're able to do that. It's your descriptors that carry your work. Never pull back on that. And I've had this running beef with the latest round of writing advice where nobody's supposed to describe things too much, or you're not supposed to use these big words, let's dumb it down. I love the fact that you're doing that. That actually is one of the hallmarks of your work, and you should be very proud of the prose that you are using and the way you draw the reader into the action with the energy and the descriptors that you're using.
So without spoiling the scene, we're going to have to try and talk around this, but I do want to check. There is the one fight where the girl is involved.
Yes.
And she contributes. Was that believable as well? Because you should have been able to infer that she actually was trained, because...
Oh, yeah. I thought so. I felt like she was actually a trained fighter. that she knew what she was doing. Without a spoiler, let me say that it was plausible and believable to me. Because when you talk about that thing about the 100-pound soaking wet gal and she somehow managed to stick somebody down, women can beat you up. If they're trained and they know what to do and they know the proper techniques, they can do it. It's just, it's a different method of fighting and it has a different end result. They're not there to stand over your body and gloat. They'll either finish the job as quickly as possible with the proper weaponry, or they will take you out at the knees as quickly as possible to do the most damage, to let you know that they are capable of doing it. And I thought that was very plausible the way that you broke the scene. So without a spoiler, I thought it worked really well.
Perfect. To tie this back to the zombie apocalypse, I'm actually rewriting the book because I originally wrote it from the perspective of the mysterious stranger, and I was like, you know what? He's too cocky. He's too confident in the fact that he can kill everyone. I didn't want to change that as a character, so I was just like, actually, the person we should be seeing the story through the eyes of is the girl. So I'm not rewriting it from the female lead's perspective. I mentioned that on Twitter. I had people going like, "Oh, well, make sure you get a woman debater read that for you, Mr. Man." It's like, I was just like, "Nah, you just have skill issues. That is not an issue I'm going to have."
I think that I've read some male writers that did very well with a female viewpoint, and this is me talking about me. I've frequently been mistaken, I think, as a male voice. I don't know what voice you heard when you read. Most of the time, people think
I
I'm
heard
a
the
man.
Watcher's voice, but
yeah.
You were writing a male character. It sounded like a male.
That's right, but it didn't seem implausible. Then if he sounded like a male character, and acted like a male character. And most of the time when anybody analyzes my book, especially AI gets a hold of it, they're like, "You're a dude, you're a dude, you're a dude." I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm fine with that. I'm all right. But one of the hardest things to do, and this is the biggest challenge for anybody, is when you are writing scenes that are romantic in nature or perhaps sexual in nature. And it's one of the reasons why romance is one of the hardest things to have a duality to it. A lot of times romance that is written by women is written for women for a reason, because we see things very differently. And it's very hard sometimes to get that right. And the same thing with male characters in romance. The reason that there has been such a great loss of men as romance readers, and we don't talk about something, men used to write romance all the time. They were what we called romances. They were done as a particular genre. Ivanhoe is one of them. There are so many great writers that wrote romances from a male perspective, and they were read by men who loved them. Thank you. I can't quite read it there, but
this is my latest book that totally flopped.
No, dude, no. Here's the
have
thing:
one review on it. It flopped.
Okay, if I don't read it, I'll have to do something. Okay,
if you want to read more of my stuff, I will. I have more productive things for you to read.
Okay, fine. Anyhow, I'll do what I want. You can't tell me. You ain't the boss of me. But I think the hardest thing is that when we try to do that cross, and it's one of the things I've tried to. I was so pleased. John loved it as a romance. As Watcher of the Damned actually is a romance. I think of it as a side plot romance. The main thing is him breaking free and then discovering this world and breaking into the.
I can see it going there in book 2.
Yeah, and as we start to move towards revolution, him becoming the man he is supposed to be. It starts with a romance. It ends with him being able to. You have to believe in something in order to break free of the change that you're in. That's the thing. There has to be a catalyst in life. For most of us, it is a romance, but for some of us, it's a disaster, and for him, it's both. But John loved it as a romance, and I was so pleased because it is sometimes so difficult to capture male romance. From a male perspective, women don't always understand it. And it's one of the reasons that most romances that are written by women for men fail, because they don't capture the way men see themselves in this act, in this moment. And it's very difficult. And I think that we've done a huge disservice to the romance industry. It's now more, nothing against romantic. Everybody, that's fine, but that's not romance. That's sexuality. That's sexy, or that's soft porn. Yeah. There's a difference with romance, and we have ignored men and how they write and feel in romance. And so when people started realizing this is a romance, I was like really nervous, because a couple of my beta readers, and one of my earliest ones, he was like, "I saw that you had romance there, and I almost started to put it down because I was afraid of where it was going to go. I was afraid of what was going to happen. It would ruin it." And I said, I'm just writing. I'm writing the characters as they go. So far, men's reaction to it and women's reaction to it have both been very positive for the most part. And I don't know why that I was able to capture that. I'm hopeful that it seems like from what I'm hearing for both sides, it is an actual true romance about both sexes, not just from one point or the other. But it is so hard. And I think that you are actively working on trying to capture that essence and have it from, even though it's from the woman's point of view, you are still able to have that male voice in it. And that is actually what's balancing it for you, I think, is the fact that I'm hearing that voice back there. I think if you were trying to write just from the girl's perspective, that might get dicey right in the middle of the romance. But the rest of it, you've done great with a voice. I don't think there's an issue with it. I think that's going to, the biggest challenge is the encounter, the actual physical encounter, because it is really hard to describe that and satisfy both parties. It is tough.
Yeah, that's a bridge I'll cross when I get there.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah.
I'm scared. I'm like, my kids read my stuff, and I'm like, mommy, I read the first one, and I was like, spoiler. There's a fade to black at the end, sort of thing that happens during the encounter.
Fade to black is
donk.
Perfectly satisfying, I'll say.
It's a fade to black for a reason, because it gets spoiler. There's something happens, and you can't help but fade to black at that point. But when it happens, my daughter was reading it, and she's an adult, and she said, and she's like, this is really spicy. I was like, are you sure? Because I pride myself on the fact that I never mentioned any body parts by name, but I've actually been able, in the past, I've actually read poetry in public that was so spicy they had to shut down the bar, and it was not one body part was ever mentioned, but I managed to evidently completely capture that, and I'm very proud of myself. And as a preacher's wife, I'm very proud of that part. And so I was hopeful that it would, and she said it was really spicy. I was like, girl, there's nothing in there that even mentions what's happening. She said, no, it's the way it's described. And so that is the most important part of it, is how do we describe it from that perspective? And I think that capturing that, bringing romance back as a part of our science fiction, and people are literally scared of it. And it's actually tragic to what's happened to the romance industry. Real romances coming out, what's happening because of language restrictions and people's fears about talking about things and about saying it in such a way that they could get dinged on it. We need to encourage men to be writing a romance. Write that romance. Do it.
I think the most telling thing is that Japan is going full into romance. Like, they do not shy away from not even like vulgar. Like, you hear romance anime and you're gonna think fan service harem. Which, yes, obviously those are made. There are consistently multiple, like, perfectly pure, non-vulgar, straight-up romances that they release every season that do well. They make money on those because guys watch them.
Yes, men long for romance. Here's the biggest lie of all, and it's one of the things that I learned so much from going to 4chan, and I'm saying this honestly, having spent a lot. You don't you laugh at me, Anan. I loved being a 4chan. If you're not there to if you don't go in there and go, I'm a woman and you should do it, just walk in there and you're listening to conversations of human beings. The absolute pervasive loneliness, the split that has occurred between the sexes that is almost purely created out of whole cloth, designed to destroy lives. There's no other way to say it. And men talking to each other about what they wish they had. They are actually very romantic creatures. And we have absolutely gutted the publishing industry for actual romance in men's fiction, in men's culture, because they're not allowed to describe what they actually love, what they actually want. And that loneliness translates into real world issues because nobody's talking to each other. We don't have things we share as a culture that go, well, this is what I want in somebody, in a partner. We need to encourage people to write what they're saying. Don't let somebody tell you don't write it because you're writing it from the viewpoint of that woman. But yes, to put in your own dreams and your own hopes. When you articulate that, I think that there is a real longing for romance in fiction, especially in science fiction and fantasy for men. But it's not that, I don't know how to say it. It's not squishy romance. I don't know how to describe it. The things that people said they were afraid of finding me, that suddenly everybody's lovey-dovey and it's all cool and we're all together now and it's great. And then 900 pages later, we're still in love and it ain't great. That's great. You know, I mean, I'm sorry, that to me is
I've
squishy.
never even encountered something like that, but I can tell that would be bad.
Yeah, well, it is. It's difficult. It's not interesting. It's kind of like I think it was the Tolstoy that said, writing about happiness wasn't exactly what people wanted to read about. It gets boring, and so we have
depends on the life you're living.
Well, yeah, but that's the cozy. That's where cozy comes in. Those cozy mysteries and the cozy things where it's just something comfortable, and the person, a horrible murder has occurred. I'm gonna go pat my cat, and I want to talk to my husband about it. We're gonna, and then they go and then they get shot at, and it's really cool, But there's a cozy feeling to it. But the longing for actual romance and adventure, that we have sort of gutted the industry of those two things together. It's sort of almost like an either or thing. We have to have either a romance or an adventure, and the twain cannot meet because we are so genrefied. I have no idea how to describe what I've been asked when they say, well, is it a romance or is it this thing? I'm like, oh, dude, you read it. How do you even describe it? It doesn't fit in an actual genre. So,
all right, hold up. So I do have to get to bed soon, actually, but I want to give the chat a moment to post any questions. I do try to end streams with Ask Me Anything. And while I give the chat a moment to post, because there's, audio delay,
sweet.
my web novel, the main character is like a mixture of Napoleon and Alexander the Great, and a bit of Genghis Khan in there, because he's the undying emperor. He's the emperor that conquers the world.
This is Roll Road, right?
Yes. One of the tags that is on that accurately is harem, because he, over the course of his conquest, he builds a harem of wives. And
makes sense. He's Genghis Khan, dude.
Yeah. The crazy thing is that out of the 23 written review, I don't remember how many written reviews I have of it. About half of them make a point of saying, I know it says it's a harem. It is a harem, man, but it's technically it's not what you're thinking about. It's so well written. You actually like the characters. They're not just tropes being thrown at you to fall into the main character's bed. They're fully developed characters. Oh, so many people need to point out that my accurate genre label means I'm actually doing it well, though.
No, that's fantastic, because the ability to tap into genre label. This is the one thing that when I first wrote this, and I had a lady that was helping me figure out how to publish it, because I had the illustrations, and I know I'm not the best illustrator. I draw what I have. It was like I do it because I wanted. And she was like, "Hey, put that in there," and I was like, "Okay, well, how?" And she's like, "Okay, I'll figure out a way." And so she would format them for me. And she said, "I said, can we say this is a romance?" And she was like, "No, you can't, because it will not fit in the genre. You can't sell it. It does not follow formula. There's actually a formula for it."
Yeah, romance is a weird one. I wonder if I'd be better off saying love-driven adventure or something.
That sounds spicy, James. Love-driven adventure.
So low-key connections here is literally the main character is drunk and he signs a contract for a magic portal, and the girl in Alfheim basically did the same thing, and now they're roommates.
Oh,
that's the inciting incident. The climax is he has to go be the big damn hero and save her.
Oh, that's so sweet. But here's the thing.
This book has everything that people should be looking forward to enjoy. I don't remember if I labeled it a romance, though.
Well, that's some of the things. And see, I actually hesitated to label romance because so many of my readers are men. And a lot of them, the ones that said I was tricked into reading a romance or whatever. And most of them liked it, but it depends on how they feel about romance. And so, if you're not really into romance, watching them might not be as much fun. On the other hand, it's because it's primarily a sci-fi Western, and I can't figure out any other way to say it, but it sort of drifts into fantasy. Then it is an allegorical. It actually is allegory to a certain extent, and those who have read the entire series will know that when they start going back through it. And part of it is based on what the things that I learned just in conversations with men on 4chan and the loneliness and how they were trying to reach each other, and to write that into a modern romance. Because when we talk about romance, one of the reasons so many people run away from it is because they are dealing with that loneliness, and they're like, this sounds like such an unattainable thing. It sounds like it's so far from my reality that I can't even read it without hurting. And so when we wrote with Watcher of the Damned, writing it as this is this lonely, terrible world, and the chances of you even meeting somebody are next to zero. What happens when you finally do meet someone and they're not exactly on the same page as you, or maybe they don't even like you? You know, how do you deal with it? Or want to even be with you? How do you deal with that? Well, of course, if you're a big dang hero, then you just decide you're going to take her anyway. But, you know, maybe that might not work out. Maybe it will, depends. But when we're dealing with these arbitrary constructs of romance, and is this science fiction or is it not? And I've decided to create this all new set of rules for this particular thing. We really need to be bold in just breaking down those walls. And I think that's something you're doing very well. And I think that's something that John Douglas actually did really well too, if he's still out there doing with Black Crown, where he breaks down the walls between the fantasy and fantasy romance and adventure. Putting all these things together, we're taking back these genres from their arbitrary constructs and creating books like our ancestors in the literary world did. When we look at the greats, Lord of the Rings is not written to fit a genre. It creates the genre. Mark Twain literally creates a genre out of humor and travelogue and satire and social commentary all at once. He didn't follow a set formula. Neither did Stevenson. So as we're writing these books, as we're writing what's in our hearts and what we want people to read, we want to start breaking down these walls of genre, even though it may cost us. I think that it has cost me as far as getting the word out about the book. I show up as like, now I'm like 1,000. I finally broke into the 1,000s because literally I'm in science fiction. Boy, that's a huge category. Couldn't figure out where to put it, so we had to put it there. And so we finally broke into 1,000, and that was a big deal on Watcher of the Damned. But we need to be so bold in doing this, because the more we try to fit a formula, the less we are going to be able to break out and identify ourselves as our own authors. Fitting someone else's formula is only going to hide us in that giant pile of everyone else who writes formula. And I think that I'm so pleased with the group of people that we have around us in indies, whether it's Timo or Lord Otter, Maji. I can't see my group of people who are here, so I'm just throwing out names. I love you guys if you're out there. If I haven't mentioned you,
Chat, you have abdicated your response period, by the way.
Yeah, sorry. I love you. I love all of you, because everything I'm reading of yours, you're trying so hard to create the new culture. And I love what you guys are doing. And it includes what James is doing as well.
All right. I'm going to message you probably tomorrow, because let's put a pin in this romance for men conversation.
Yeah.
And that'll be another night. I'm going to go sleep.
Dude, yeah, because there's a thing called sleep for men. And it's not something that many of you actually do, evidently. So maybe you should try it, guys.
Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you all. And thank you for having me, James. I really appreciate it. That was just so fun.
Yeah, all right. Chat, like, and subscribe. You know the drill.
Yay.